Hey everyone, over the last several lectures, we've been taking a look at this modern world and artists' response to this in terms of realism, in terms of impressionism and post-impressionism. I want to take a look at a couple other movements that are happening in terms of Art Nouveau and Symbolism and their response to this modern changing world. And so this lecture is going to be a little bit shorter than the last one. Last time I went over a little bit in terms of time, so I'll try to make this one a bit more brief, give you kind of the general gist of it, and let you guys focus on studying it and filling in whatever gaps are needed. But in terms of the pre-Raphaelites, again, I've given you a definition on how I have encountered their works. This is a group of artists in the mid-19th century. They're coming from England. The group of writers and artists sought to revive the aesthetic qualities of the early Renaissance art that preceded the High Renaissance period associated with Raphael and his contemporaries. And so going back to an earlier period, so again, very similar to what we've seen in the previous lecture in terms of primitivism. Not necessarily that they're going back to primitive kind of tribes or whatnot, but the idea of removing oneself from the present and seeking solace in some type of golden age or romanticized past, right? So that's kind of a similar trend in primitivism, a similar trend that we see here. They're not exactly the same, but there's some similarities in terms of escaping contemporary realities. Rather than depicting an idealized life, they wanted to represent the dignity of real life and the value of labor. They were inspired by important literature such as Shakespeare, Keats, and the Bible, and wanted to represent these ideas in their art. Their works demonstrate the vivid colors and fine brushstroke, very different from other modern works that we've been studying in terms of Impressionism or Post-Impressionism. This is very different. They wanted to capture the stunning visual reality, right? So in some ways, this is a kind of a discussion of photography, trying to capture kind of a photorealism. So rather than kind of rejecting it or pushing away from the photograph, they're trying to embrace that essence in a sense, right? The pre-Raphaelites aimed to reject the industrialization and commercialization of art that had become prevalent during the Victorian era, and sought to return to the sincerity and spirituality they perceived in medieval and early Renaissance art. So trying to capture the spirituality of art and the spiritual message of art rather than just the consumption of art, right? William Holman Hunt was one of the founding members of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, also known as the PRB. He was an office clerk but turned to art. Notice that there's a similar trend happening within the lives of artists, and studied the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in England. His works demonstrate a meticulous attention to detail and the visual reality. His works have vibrant colors, symbolism, and moral themes, right? So this one's immediately different from Impression Sunrise. It's immediately different from Van Gogh's Potato Eaters, or very different from Cézanne or Gauguin's self-portrait with a halo and apples, right? Very different in terms of what's happening in England with the pre-Raphaelites, where here we see the stunning detail, the pristine clarity. I mean, look at the piano, right? The light coming from above the shoulder of the artist and reflecting this kind of glistening shine of the piano. And then again on the basin, the foot pedals of the piano. And then we can see just the light coming in, kind of a cast shadow of the door frame over here. And then we see just very clear, pristine, everything in this apartment is meant to be very new, almost as though it was just purchased at the store. The message, the awakening of conscience, this is about a gentleman who has a girlfriend who's not his wife, in the city, and he buys her all of the luxurious elements of the world around him, this idea of materialism and buying things, the rising bourgeoisie, right? So these are all happening at the time. And then he starts to play a song for her with his left hand, right, on the piano, and then you have the song right here as she sits on his lap. And then as she, listens to the song, she returns to this childhood innocent state where she's kind of caught up in this this memory, this imagination of, of a yesteryear when she used to be pure, when she used to have her morality rather than, running off with husbands that are married. She has this awakening of conscience. And so this is the idea, the moralizing theme here of this suggests that she has kind of found herself. She's come to be, right? So the idea, this is what is known as the kept woman, right? The kept woman inside the city, confined to this new space here, based on this false pretensions of their relationship. He's kind of trying to encourage her to sit back down. No, don't get up. But she's already having this awakening. And then the idea here is this is alluding to the fact that she's then going to leave him and get her life in order. But again, very different from the brushstroke of other modern works of modern art that's going to happen. I mean, this is 1853, about the time of realism. Similar idea of responding to, industrialization, urbanization, modernism, et cetera, but different in terms of how bright this is in terms of realism. Realism has this, extreme earth tones, darker themes to focus on the impoverished nature of the working class and their struggles, their plight. This is showing the struggles and plight of the rising bourgeoisie, the rising money that's happening, but their struggles are different. Their struggles are morality. They have all of the, luxuries of life, and now they're choosing to do things that are immoral, and they're trying to, find their way, find their awakening, right? But I mean, great detail. I mean, look at the detail of the clock, the glass, right, with the clock inside it, and you can see the window coming in, the wonderful mirror here that you see in the background that reflects her and him. Amazing detail. They're wanting to capture the realism of the Renaissance. Ophelia, this is the subject matter. John Everett Millais, inspired by the great works of literature, wanting to illustrate this. Ophelia comes from Hamlet. Ophelia was Hamlet's girlfriend, who was caught between her father, who was Polonius, who was the king's advisor, King Claudius's advisor. The king petitioned Polonius to find out what's going on with Hamlet, who's the son of the former king who suddenly died, who has become suspicious that his uncle Claudius killed his father, right? So he's trying to find out information on them. And so Claudius feels that Hamlet's acting suspiciously, so he asks Polonius to find out what's happening, and then Polonius goes to his daughter Ophelia, who's dating Hamlet, to use her as a spy. Hamlet's suspicious of this, and so he doesn't really trust Ophelia, and there's a lot of tension that happens in their relationship. And so what happens in the context of the play is Ophelia is caught between these two worlds of Hamlet, her love, and her father's love and duty to him. Can't take it anymore. And so she goes out, driven by kind of insane, and I mean, according to the context of the play, and then she goes out and she drowns herself. And so this is the moment when she goes off and she sinks down into the water, weighed down by her heavy corset and dress and whatnot. And then this is the kind of a call to, paying attention specifically to the importance of important literature, but also calling attention to being caught between, this, fatherly love and the love of, your romantic love interest, having that tension between them, surrounded in nature by flowers, and she just kind of peacefully will go under the water and then drown. But he was heavily influenced by Victorian culture and moral themes, and his works display a rich colors and strong attention to detail. We can't really see any brushstrokes. I mean, it would be really hard if you get really close, you could probably start to see them. But trying to focus exactly how the eye sees, focus on details and imagery, right? A lot of people love pre-Raphaelites for their attention to detail and for their photorealism. This one is Christ in the carpenter's shop. Here we see Christ at the center, being adored by, I guess it would be Mary. Not 100% sure on that one. And then John the Baptist, who is carrying water. I'm assuming this would be Elizabeth, and then this is Joseph working in a carpentry shop. But again, what we see here are some subtle indications of, the crucifix, right? We see the planks that are going to be used. We see the subtle indication of the wound in the hands and in the feet, which is symbolic of the future life of what Jesus will be. So again, trying to find morality in a world that feels as though it's falling apart, morally speaking, right? And so, again, we see that often in society. We see it often in art. We see it often in social movements whenever it feels like there's a lot of uncertainty, doubt, confusion. It seems like society has lost their moral compass. There tends to be a recentering of this to find it again. We saw this in an example in this class with Savonarola, where people were caught up in pagan ideas and pagan imagery, and he comes in and says, society is corrupt. We need to get back to our roots. And then we have artists starting to burn their art, and then Raphael comes along and tries to find some type of stability, and it kind of returns to more of a traditional form of art focusing on Christian themes. We see similar ideas within modern artists responding to their world, responding to the concerns of their day, the anxieties, concerns, confusions, and we see them returning to a sense of order here at morality in terms of Gauguin, simplicity, and primitivism, right? So similar ideas that are happening. Dante Gabriel Rossetti was a prominent pre-Raphaelite painter and poet. He studied at the Royal Academy of Arts, where he met Hunt and Millais. As with their works, he uses vibrant colors and strong attention to detail. Proserpine is also known as Persephone. We've talked about her before, where she was taken to Hades, abducted, taken to Hades, and then he gives her a piece of fruit, and then she eats that and must return. And this is where we get the seasons, because Demeter is angry that her daughter has been abducted by Hades, and so she causes a famine. So now every time she's down in Hades, there's a famine upon the land. We call that winter. Here's the representation of that, right? A modern representation of Persephone as she bites her fruit, and then she kind of looks off into the distance, right? Kind of reflecting on the effect of what that's going to have. So again, it's about bringing important literature back and finding the roots, our roots within those important literary elements. And it's also about moralizing things, right? What happens when you, I guess, run off or get abducted by, I don't know. But the idea of trying to demonstrate the morality, the weightiness of it, and trying to find our moral roots in a society that feels as though it's bursting at the seams with problems and complexity. Symbolism is another movement that responds to modernism and some of these ideas, but they're going to take a different angle to this. It's an international literary and art movement of the late 19th century that was strongly influenced by the artistic values of Paul Gauguin, the idea of escapism, right? That idea. The literary themes of Charles Baudelaire, right? So we're not really going to take a look at him, but he was just a French poet. The symbolists examine irrational forms of human experience with an emphasis on emotion, imagination, and spirituality. So again, trying to find spirituality in a world that feels corrupt due to the changes that people are experiencing. And it's not as though they were probably no less corrupt than any era that came before them, right? Think about the era that came before them was the era of Joseph Smith that put him to death, right? So, and the era, if we go back, several more centuries, we have the era of Christ, which they crucified Jesus. And so I don't know. I'm not sure if there's any era that's particularly, free of problems. But I think every era feels as though they're at the worst that life could actually be. Maybe it's somewhat true. Maybe humanity is getting worse. Maybe in some ways we're getting better. Who's to say? It's just to suggest that artists are responding. This is a similar trend that we see within art. They wanted to find a deeper realities that generally are hidden from daily life. So what's below the surface, similar to what we see with Van Gogh, right? Getting below the surface to capture the essence of something. They renounced the rationalism of materialism that dominated the 19th century European culture. The idea of buying things and money became more important. They reject that idea, that trend. Rather than representing the world, they focus on capturing artistic imagination and emotion. Hence, their works have ambiguous forms and mysterious meanings. Interestingly, Sigmund Freud wrote Interpretation of Dreams in 1899, which explored the hidden urges of desires within the human psyche, like our dreams. What do our dreams really mean? Is there more to them than just, we dreamed at night, right? So he suggests there is. They reveal unconscious motivations, unconscious desires that we need to come to terms with. He writes that during the height of the symbolist movement. And so in some ways, we have two ideas that are happening simultaneously. The idea of Freud looking deep within at the human psyche, and we have symbolism, which is looking deep within at the human psyche. Now, Freud is doing this, scientifically with psychoanalysis, and symbolism is doing this artistically with, cultural development. But we see similar trends, right? Because they're responding to similar concerns, right? Henri Rousseau had no formal training as an artist, and so he's going to have that kind of more of a primitive style. Art was his second career, as we see with a lot of artists during this time. He worked his entire life as a customs clerk. Most critics of his day saw his work as a joke. So they're like, dude, this just isn't good. This is just too cliche. It's too kind of too cardboard cutout, stereotypical, right? So they didn't really take it seriously. They just saw him as stereotypical scenes of fantasies and dreams. But to him, that's kind of the point. It's about escaping the problems of our life, right? Our fantasies and dreams are important. He often used imagery from pop culture rather than from high culture. So that's another reason why art critics kind of condemn him, because he's not a true serious artist who's focusing on very serious things, right? However, his works show a strong understanding of color, perspective, scale, and he constantly exhibited with the Salon d'Automne. So what we see within his works is this idea of dreams, escaping, primitivism. Here we see this idea of a sleeping gypsy off in the Middle East, not surrounded by modernism, industrialism, right, urbanization. And he's just peaceful, at sleep, right? Escaping the pressures of his day, escaping the pressures of his life, not, drowned out by all of the modern pressures of the world around us. And then a lion just kind of comes up and sniffs him as he's sleeping. There's a lute right next to him associated with music and this idea of happiness, joy. And he's just kind of off in this kind of romantic setting, this exotic setting. So a couple of themes to think about within Rousseau and how it kind of connects to this. Number one is this idea of escapism, this idea of primitivism that we see with Gauguin continues on with Rousseau, escaping the pressures of modern reality. Another one is whether the gypsy, if this is a representation of the gypsy's dream, right? Because we see him dreaming, right? So if the gypsy is dreaming, then that means the lion is real, but maybe the whole thing is a dream. And so it's a dream within a dream, which gets us to think more about questioning our reality and what we know to be true in the world around us. Our senses can be deceived. Very similar to what we see with Van Gogh in questioning the external reality and suggesting that memories, impressions, emotions are much more trustworthy because the exterior world can be manipulated with. And so maybe this is the sleeping gypsy is about the sleeping gypsy, but also maybe it's about the idea of our escaping to the world around us, right? Taking a look at another theme with this, right? Sleeping gypsy to the dream, right? Here we see a woman without any clothes on, and in this jungle, right? In this vibrant jungle, kind of almost this cartoon kind of childlike kind of innocence in terms of his style, his aesthetics, and how distinct the shapes are. It almost looks like it's a set for a stage, right? Kind of stage props, and this is kind of the background for it. And then the figures here are just kind of cut out, almost like a collage. And it lacks that idea of traditional depth that we've examined before. It seems like they're just kind of pasted on top of one another. There's still an indication of depth with the lions that are further back in the midground than we see in the foreground with the plants. And then there's the elephant that's kind of hiding out here. And then this, I don't know what that would be, a recorder maybe, player that's playing a musical instrument, and then the jungle around them. But the idea of removing oneself from the world to escape this other kind of dreamy type world. And then the woman's there again. So the question is she dreaming, or is it the viewer that's dreaming? Is this our desire to escape? And so again, it questions this idea of reality, and can we really trust the world around us, right? But the ideas, the images are exotic. They lack that idea of realism, and they're just mainly about trying to demonstrate ideas that are beyond Western tradition, beyond Western influences, right? Similar to what we see with Gauguin, right? That idea of escapism. And then this one, we can tell that this one is a Rousseau right away just by the couple images that you have seen, right? It has that kind of that stage background kind of feel to it. Things are kind of pasted onto one another. It feels like this is more of a scene that you would see if you went to the theater one night. You have the tiger, the fight between the tiger and the buffalo. But again, the idea of the exotic qualities to it. You don't necessarily see where the lighting comes from. So again, it's not really about Impressionism's focus on lighting and shade. It has this kind of timelessness to it, this kind of escaping from the world of time to give us this sense of a dream and life beyond. Redon's, a lot of people struggle with Redon. A lot of people like him. A lot of people struggle with him. And because his images are a little bit bizarre, some people like that. Some people think it's a little too bizarre, and it kind of meets the uncanny. But he was an accomplished violinist that turned to art after serving in the Franco-Prussian War. He started in lithography and drawing, which shaped his paintings. He later settled in Paris and became associated with the Independents. He helped to organize the Salon of Independence in 1884. So again, this avant-garde movement, and exhibited with the Last Impressionist exhibition in 1886. His first works are in 1880s, which are charcoal with mysterious subjectivity, as we see here, with themes of melancholy, and he started using colors in the 1890s. His works are dreamlike images. They convey aspects of the visual world with natural settings, but also deviate from external realities. Gauguin said of Redon's works, I don't see why it is said that Odilon Redon paints monsters, they're imaginary beings. He's a dreamer, an imaginary spirit. So as we take a look at with the Cactus Man, we see these dreamlike qualities. We recognize the face of the man. We recognize the planter's box, and we also recognize the needles of a cactus, but together simultaneously they produce a distorting and uneasy feel for us. It's kind of dreamlike feel. And so the idea here is he's trying to evoke this imaginary spirit, right? This imagination in a similar way to what we see with Cézanne's Still Life with Basket of Apples, trying to remove himself from visual reality. With Cézanne's image, we see him focusing on putting more than one perspective in a given work, trying to get away from the visual reality of seeing from one point perspective. What we see with Cactus Man, we see the blending of ideas, blending of imagination with reality, coming together to create a new experience, a new image for us to think about. Or the smiling spider, right? The idea here is we recognize a spider. We don't necessarily recognize a spider that's smiling, and we don't really recognize the spider with one too many, or is it two too many legs, as it dangles from the ceiling. But it's this imaginative spirit that it's trying to evoke, right? As one looks up at a ceiling and just looks at a spider, if we can push past our initial reactions, our initial emotions, maybe we can see something different, something that isn't necessarily there. Another one that's also a little bit creepy is the crying spider. So there's a smiling spider and the crying spider, giving us kind of this disorienting feel. He starts to dabble with colors a little bit later. Here's his Cyclops, where we recognize the woman lying on the ground, and then the cliff that kind of comes to life as a Cyclops looking at the woman rather creepily as she sleeps. But similar to what we see with Rousseau, the focus here is on dreams, imagination, the questioning of reality. What is real? Does visual reality actually capture truth, or does the artistic imagination, memories, ideas, insights, imagination capture truth, right? What gets us closer to truth? Notice the brushstroke here it looks very similar to that of maybe other impressionists that we have studied, but the color scheme is quite different. We recognize that there is, the flowers and maybe the lilies over here. We recognize the green grass that surrounds the woman as she sleeps. But it's also this kind of odd, it doesn't necessarily look too natural in the fact that the colors are there, but they're not really interacting with one another. They're just kind of placed on a canvas, which makes it feel a little bit more dreamlike, a little bit more distant from the world that we know, in a similar way to Rousseau's The Dream, where their idea is capturing imagination, the inner mind, the inner dreams, the inner concerns, and maybe separating oneself from the modern world to escape into this other dreamlike world that's apart from the world in which we live. Let's take a look at Edvard Munch, who is also a symbolist. He's a Norwegian painter, printmaker, and draftsman. His mother died when he was 5, and his sister died when he was 14. So death surrounds a lot of his childhood, and this is going to deeply impact a lot of the work that he creates. He spent most of his later life in Germany. His first visit to Paris was for 2 weeks, where he became familiar with the avant-garde, right, the art movement, doing something new and innovative, different. His second trip to Paris lasted 2 years. He became associated with the Symbolists during the 1890s, and he was especially concerned with the expressive representation of emotions and personal relationships. He was plagued with depression, and especially after his father's sudden death, and his works express a fascination with inner trauma and death. He later had a mental breakdown, partially due to alcohol and nicotine poisoning. His works have exaggerated brushstrokes with swirling lines and conflicting color schemes. His body of works include 4,443 paintings and 15,391 prints, so an impressive body of work. This one you guys are familiar with. This one is often parodied in society and often referred to. So it's pretty prevalent in our culture. This one's The Scream, but again, it's focusing on this idea of inner trauma and death. Here, an individual is walking across a bridge in an inner city and just screams out. And this is taking a look at the inner anxiety, the turmoil of being surrounded by a bunch of people, but yet not knowing anyone. And Munch argues that you never feel so alone as when you're in a crowd of strangers. And so if you think about the changing urban world with all these people leaving their home, leaving their communities where they've lived for generations and going to this inner city where they're alone, they don't know anybody, it's going to produce some anxiety. It's going to produce some tension. And here, this scream is not an exterior scream, it's an interior scream. So this is the inner mind. What's the mind look like? Which in his mind is a truer representation than if he just painted something realistically and gave you realistic colors. This is about trying to capture what an actual mental break looks like, or mental anxiety looks like, right? We see the intense contrast of complementary colors between the oranges and the blues, right? The sky and the river underneath the bridge coming together to produce that tension and anxiety, similar to what we see with Van Gogh's The Night Cafe, producing that intense color to create tension, anxiety. We see the swirling lines that don't disguise the brushstroke, but actually emphasize it to demonstrate that this is a created work. These are the insights and perspectives of an artist. And then the figure here is not meant to look realistic, right? It's meant to be just this inner anxiety of this shell of a person who has just kind of gone to the complete end, right? He comes back to this several times throughout his career. So there's different ones: tempera on cardboard, crayon on cardboard, pastel on cardboard. So it's a predominant theme within much of his works. But again, he's responding to this modern world, the changes that he's living in, and rather than escaping them, like we see with maybe Cézanne and Gauguin, and to some extent with the pre-Raphaelites, and just kind of withdrawing from the modern world, he confronts it, and he suggests this is kind of what it does to people, right? This is what we need to. We can't just paint beautiful pictures and think that life is lovely with rainbows. Let's confront the world, even in its ugliness, to then deal with it, right? If you just kind of bury it and live in denial and just painting rainbows, right? That might be healthy for a time, but at some point we're going to have to confront those inner demons, so to speak, confront the ugliness or the anxieties that we're facing, and represent them. And then through representing them, we can work through them. And so Van Gogh and Munch demonstrate that, right? That direct conflict. Here's the dead mother, which this one is one of the most haunting images of Munch. Here we have a young child and the dead mother in the background. Looks kind of similar to the dying woman in Van Gogh's that we studied last time. But here, the child in the foreground that just captivates our attention, right? The mother almost blends in with the pillow. Her face is white with the pillow and the blankets and the sheets that surround her. But the child, right, who puts his hands to his head in a very similar manner to what we see with the scream. This is a child who can't take it, right? This is a child that is experiencing too much emotion, at too young of an age to be able to know what's going on, to know how to deal with it. So just tuning the world out. So the desire to tune the world out. And that he's confronting those themes of death, of anxiety, inner turmoil that we're surrounded by to examine them, right? All right, let's take a look at the last artist I want to take a look at for symbolism is Auguste Rodin. And he's a French sculptor and draftsman. He is the only sculptor of the modern age regarded in his lifetime to be on par with Michelangelo. That's how good he was. He was considered to be a prodigy at an early age, but faced rejection from the art academies. I will say, however, he did experience in his lifetime wide success, right? So the idea of him being rejected from art academies, yes, that's part of it. But the other part of the story is he transcended that and became extremely popular and extremely successful. He is known for his ability to capture human spirit and a wide range of human emotions. And so what we see with the thinker, which is his most famous work that we're all familiar with, is the idea of the thinker. And this thinker is the modern thinker, right? Modern humanity is thinking, contemplating in a similar way to what we see with Gauguin. Where do we come from? Where are we? And where are we going? We see this idea, this kind of existential question, right? He's questioning, where am I? Where am I going, right? And how do I confront all of the complexities and anxieties and difficulties that surround us? This was meant to be for the Gates of Hell project, which was one of his most ambitious works during his lifetime. He never finished it, though, but it was going to be for a pair of bronze doors for the Museum of Decorative Arts in Paris. And so here's a kind of a plaster mold for it that he did complete, but he never actually completed the bronze doors. But this was one of the designs that was supposed to be at the very top of it. So this was kind of I don't know if it's necessarily a counterpiece, but it's kind of like a counterpiece to Ghiberti's Gates of Paradise, right? This is supposed to be the Gates of Hell project. And so the idea here is this is what it would look like if you were entering into hell. So think maybe Michelangelo's Last Judgment, those kind of ideas and themes that people were thinking about. And so you can see the design here. And this is one of the many images. This one I think is in Paris. There's another one in Kansas City. There's another one. I can't remember where all of them are. I think there's another one in Philadelphia. But there's like 20 of them that he made because he made them from bronze, from a plaster mold. And so he would just make many of them. And he thought, you know what, if I can make a lot of money off of one work, why stop there? Why not make many of them? And so he gets his art out there in a similar way to what printing was doing during the Renaissance, getting the artist name out there and commissioning. But one of the main ideas for this is, what is he thinking about? And putting this on the top of the Gates of Hell that we see here, putting this at the top, you have to wonder what he's thinking. And you can suggest, or I think an argument can be made, that he was heavily influenced by Michelangelo's Last Judgment, right? So as this person is being dragged down to hell, you can only think about the amount of regret, the amount of, fear, horror that's going through his mind as he's being kind of taken by these demons and even bitten on the leg by this serpent demon. Borrows the same kind of gesture with the hand on the head here. He kind of turns it downward rather than covering the face. He kind of puts it on the chin. And then a similar kind of movement of the hand, the other hand kind of crossing and putting on the knee, right? So this idea of the crossing. So a similar type of body arrangement. And one can only start thinking, okay, how is this a representation of modern humanity? And I think part of it is the fact that it's representing the inner anxieties that we're facing. In a similar way to Munch, rather than, running from them or denying them or what have you, this is the idea of confronting the anxieties, doubts, confusions. And through confronting them, maybe we can deal with them in a more positive way and be more beneficial. This is the last one I want to take a look at. This is the Burghers of Calais, which comes from a story during the 100 Years' War between France and England. England gets the upper hand and then tells the French leaders if they sacrifice the burghers of Calais, the leaders of the town, if they give them to England, they'll spare the rest of the town. And so these are the leaders. The burghers are just like a mayor of the town of Calais going off to their execution in England. So you see their inner anxiety, their doubt, their confusion. Their head is cast down. This individual has his head in his hands, confronting the horror of his own mortality and death. And focusing on these inner anxieties, right? So symbolism is a lot about the imagination, a lot about dreams, as we see with Rousseau and Redon, but it's also about trying to confront the darker side of the human condition and the doubts and inner minds and emotions that we have underneath the surface. And so artists like Munch and Rodin are part of the symbolist movement that are examining those particular qualifications. All right, let's take a look at Art Nouveau just briefly here. Art Nouveau just translates to new art. Nouveau means new. It occurred during the late 19th and into the early 20th centuries. While the style varied depending on the region, it mainly focused on applying art to industry through decorative and graphic arts. And so it's combining high art with functional art and trying to find a way to balance them, right? Organic lines and colors and abstract shapes and patterns that blend together are common stylistic elements. Their focus was to integrate the natural world with industry, right? So this is what it would look like. These are a couple of posters that were put out during this time. Alphonse Mocha was known for his posters, and they become extremely popular. He moved to Paris at age 28. He worked for a graphic designer. One day, a movie producer needed a poster, but all the designers were on vacation. So Mocha filled in and designed a poster for Sarah Bernhardt that you see here. I think I put it in here. The poster captured the new style. It was so popular that people would steal the poster around Paris and take them home. Responding to electricity, the camera, the car, and the new electric walkway, his works capture the natural curves and the female forms and seeks to reconnect humanity with nature. So where humanity is moving towards modernization and technology, he's suggesting that we've lost our roots and we need to reconnect with the natural world, in a very similar argument that we saw with primitivism. And so here we see this woman that's off in nature, and the curved lines of the woman, right? The idea of Mother Nature. Women are more associated with nature with their curved lines. And then the curved lines of the grass and the flowers beneath her, connecting her to nature, connecting humanity to nature. Here's another representation of a poster that he did for the Zodiac, giving you the signs of the month. And this is connecting to Native American iconography, Native American regalia, or that's probably not the right word for it, clothing, attire, connecting that to the idea of nature and our surroundings. Notice how her hair kind of, at the end, it turns into what appears to be vines. And then you have the cycle of the calendar that surrounds her. that's associating humanity to the natural cycles of the earth to connect it to earth once again. This is some Art Nouveau styles in terms of architecture and the decorative arts. But the idea here is to use functional buildings, apartment buildings that we would live in, but make them look more natural, make them look more like you were living in the jungle or in the woods or something along those lines, to make those natural lines seem as though, bringing those natural lines to the urban environment. And the theory behind that is that people would feel more at peace with the natural world. Maybe we'll see less people like the scream or less people like the thinker or that inner anxiety if we can find greater peace and harmony with the urban world around us. And then they were commissioned to do the entrance signs to the metro in Paris. And so if you still walk around, to this day, if you walk around Paris, there'll be many of these that show you where the metro is. And so this is all based on the Art Nouveau design, making them look like they're natural vines or you're in a jungle, right, to connect this urban world to these more natural elements, these more natural styles. And then this is the decorative arts, applying high art to decorative art, where making the lines look more curvilinear rather than, geometric or sharp, making that feel more like, you're connecting humanity to our natural elements, right? All right, we'll leave off with Gustav Klimt, right? Just real briefly here, Klimt's connection to the Art Nouveau movement. Klimt's father was a goldsmith, which influenced his later works. There's going to be a lot of gold leaf within his works. He was an Austrian painter and the leader of an Art Nouveau movement there. Vienna was caught between their staunch tradition of the art world, right, and the burgeoning modern world and the ideas of modern art. And so they're having their kind of impressionist struggle in the early 20th century, right? Paris already had that in the 1870s, but Vienna is kind of behind the times, so to speak, in terms of culture, and so they haven't had that real struggle. So this is the first real movement that struggles against tradition in Vienna. His emerging style consists of using gold inlay and intertwined lovers, as we see here with the Kiss. His later works are portraits, which is where he made most of his living as a painter. People would say, "Hey, can you paint my portrait?" And he made quite a bit of money with that. In connection with Art Nouveau, Klimt's works reveal flowing organic lines and themes of humanity reuniting with nature. And so, as we see with this Kiss here, we recognize that the realism of the skin color around her face, her shoulder, her elbows, her feet, and the neck of the man, and the hairline, his face is turned away from us to give her the kiss, and she embraces him. But all around them are these more natural elements, right? He's symbolic kind of the masculinity of the rectangles images, and she has more of the femininity of the circles, but the idea of them coming together and reuniting in this natural element here. And it almost looks like these flowers are like on a waterfall of flowers as they kind of go off the edge of the cliff and grow. I don't know if anywhere in the world where they grow kind of like that, right? Maybe, but the idea that's producing this natural setting, and then against this kind of dark inlay to make them kind of stand out against the background. But the idea is this immersion, this connection with nature, in a similar way to what we see with Redon, although this one, Klimt's much more realistic, right? This is more about a fantasy. I mean, I guess this is kind of that fantasy, but this one with the Cyclops in there, it makes it less real. This one is Klimt's The Kiss is much more focused on the world around us, but trying to teach and instruct people how to reconnect with their natural elements, to reconnect with these primitive driving forces. And then this is an example of the works later on that he starts to do, focusing on portraits. And Adele Bloch-Bauer is just a very wealthy person in Vienna that wanted her portrait done. But what we see, again, the skin color and the face are all very realistic, but then he blends the rest of her, blends the clothing, blends the background, blends everything together to blur them, suggesting that we need to have clothing, decorative arts that surround us, that connect us to the natural world. But it's very similar to what we see with Cézanne's Mont Sainte-Victoire, the idea of blending the background and the foreground to flatten the space, right? Some people argue that Adele Bloch-Bauer is the Mona Lisa of Vienna. connecting her to this new wave of art, right? So this becomes kind of their response or their kind of monumental piece of significance of Vienna entering into this modern art scene and connecting with this new avant-garde style. They did a movie about this. I just want to show you a clip from, or a trailer of the movie to pique your interest. Hopefully you'll take a moment and watch it at some point in your life, but it's about this specific work about Adele Bloch-Bauer and how the Nazis, when they came into Vienna, they went into the Jewish homes and they took all of the art and jewelry and money, and then they redistributed it. They took it out. So what they did with this particular work is they gave it to a museum in Vienna, and that museum had it until the early 2000s, somewhere around there, when her family sues them and says, you have stolen art in your museum, we would like to give it back. And the art museum's like, yeah, no, this is the Mona Lisa of Vienna, we can't give this back. And they're like, well, the Nazis stole it, you can't just, and so there's that tension. And so the film takes a look at that. What do we do with art that's been stolen historically?
Your son, the lawyer, how is he? I need advice from someone I can trust. Here she is, my aunt.
It's quite a painting.
She was taken off the walls of our home by the Nazis. Since then, she's been hanging in Vienna.
And now you'd like to be reunited.
And then there's justice. I never thought I'd come back.
Welcome to Vienna. They're going to put as many obstacles in your way as possible.
She is the Mona Lisa of Austria. We will fight you till the end for something we believe is ours.
They destroyed my family, and they forced me to abandon the people and the places that I loved.
You're going to file a lawsuit. We're taking the Austrian government to court. Have a nice day.
All along, you have thwarted me and closed the doors in my face.
This is a case of one woman wanting justice.
People see a masterpiece by one of Austria's finest artists. But I see a picture of my aunt. We should be reunited with what is rightfully ours.
Anyway, super good movie. Highly recommend Woman in Gold if you haven't seen it. But it examines, thinking about art history and some of the complexities of art history, it examines the idea of sometimes it gets really kind of murky on who gets art, the idea of art provenance. Sometimes art ends up in the wrong hands for the wrong reasons. And currently, the British Museum in London is encountering this, right? The British Empire owned a lot of land throughout parts of Asia, Africa, and when they were there, they just kind of took whatever they wanted. They found something, a historical value, and they took it back and they put it in their museum. And now these areas are saying, wait a minute, that's our art. Those are our cultural manifestations. We'd like them back. And currently the British Museum is like, yeah, I don't think so, which is producing a lot of tension, right? So then that leads to the question of who has the rightful ownership of it, right? Does the British Museum have it because they've owned it for the last 100, 200 years? Does the original location and tribe or culture own it, or current country own it? So it brings a lot of these complexities. And so just some of the complexities that are going on within the art world. All right, so we've taken a look at a couple of art movements and their response to modernism in terms of Impressionism, Post-Impressionism, the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, and Symbolism, Art Nouveau, and how there's some similarities, some similar themes that we see kind of connecting them together, but also some differences in terms of style, right? They're all responding to the same social, historical movements, but they have different ways of conveying the human experience within this. Sometimes they think that the antidote for modernism is to run from the modern world, and sometimes they think it is to confront it and to display it and to become aware of it, right? So different ideas, different approaches to dealing with the modern world.